We are resuming meeting number 70 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. We are continuing our study of Bill S-245. When we left off, we were debating the question, shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? I had two people on the speaking list, Mr. Redekop and Mr. Kimmich. Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to take a little different tactic tonight. I know the last few meetings I've started by trying to move my motion to talk about the Indian students, and I think we all want to see some action on the Indian student issue, and I don't want to see another time it voted down. I think that would be bad. And so what I would like to suggest, just maybe this is more of a point of order than anything, is I would like to suggest that after we're done with 245, hopefully tonight, we move to a committee business where we can consider that motion and other committee business if it comes up. And I'm just wondering if we could have an agreement that we could do that, Madam Chair.
But that is automatic.
Mr. Dhaliwal, let me recognize first. First, we have to complete this bill S-245. We are resuming, the meeting was suspended. We are resuming back. Once we get through that, then we will proceed. So first, we need to get through Bill S-245. We have a legislation that's of importance. First, we need to clear that. After that, we can see where we can go.
Well, as long as the committee has the will to at least consider going to committee business, and just to show that we are willing to do it, I would suggest we proceed to the vote on this clause, on this statement.
Do we have all the members agree to that? Ms. Lalonde?
Madam Chair, I have my hand up.
Yes, Mr. Dhaliwal and then Ms. Lalonde. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, there's no issue with NDP, Bloc, Conservative, or us on the Liberal side, bringing, any of those motion or anything to do with those students. We all want to help. But the main thing is, we wanted this 245 to go, and if we can get that out now, and then I'm sure that every member in this house on the Liberal side, I'm certain they are fully on supportive. Not only supportive, in fact, they are already talking to the minister, they're already talking to IRCC, CBSA to make sure that justice prevails.
Mr. Dhaliwal, Ms. Lalonde.
Well, I guess I wanted to ask my colleague what he meant by, for us, it's very important that we move forward on S-245, and I think that's the reason why we have spent over 28 hours throughout this wonderful initiative, and I'm sure a lot of people outside of this House and this committee will be happy to see this coming to a vote. So I would be happy to find out more about how the member wants to proceed, but my first thinking is let's get S-245 to a vote.
Mr. Kimmich and then Ms. Kwan.
Yeah, I thought I was on the list before. Chair, like I said, I went to my caucus. I'm ready to vote.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am very ready for the vote. I think we have been for some time, and so are the lost Canadian families. So let's get on with it.
Thank you. Seeing no debate, we can go for a vote. So, shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Clerk, if you can please take the vote. We are voting on, shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Ali? Yes. Mr. Dhaliwal?
Yes.
Monsieur El Khoury? Yes. Madame Kayabaga?
Ms. Kayabaga, are you on mute?
Hear me?
You can do thumbs up or thumbs down.
Kayabaga, is your screen frozen? Can you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Actually, in all fairness, this goes in your point.
She logged off.
Okay.
Huh? Yeah, you continue then. I think she will log on.
Madame Lalonde?
Oui.
Mr. Kimmich?
No.
Mr. Redekop?
No.
Ms. Rempel-Garner?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
No.
Mr. Brunet-Duceppe?
Oui.
Ms. Kwan?
Yes.
She's logging in. So.
Back to Madame Kayabaga.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Yea 7, nays 4.
Yes, so I will report the bill as amended. It is adopted. Thank you to everyone. Patience. No, I'm coming to that. Thank you to all the officials, the team being led by Ms. Gerard. Let's give her a big hand. I know you have been very patient and you had to spend your husband's birthday with us to get through this bill S245. So on behalf of all the members of the committee, I really want to thank you and your team for being here, like many long evenings. So, and thank you to all the support staff, the interpreters. I'm coming to you, Ms. Kwan. I just want to wrap it up, and then I'm coming to you. And I really want to thank all the members for their cooperation, their patience, and all our staff also. Yes, and because we can't do it with our staff, so thank you to everyone for getting this legislation. So hopefully I will report it back, and we will be moving on. Okay, so coming back, yes, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too also like to thank the staff, particularly for their patience and endurance with this bill. Now, I'd like to actually move two motions, Madam Chair. I know that I'll move them one by one. I'll let the first one be dealt with first, and then when we're finished with that, if you can come back to me, Madam Chair, I'll move my second motion. So my first motion is as follows, that following news reports that international students admitted into Canada with valid study permits were issued fraudulent college acceptance letters by immigration consultants and are now facing deportation. The committee issued a news release to condemn the actions of these fraudulent ghost consultants and call on the Canadian Border Services Agency to immediately stay pending deportations of affected international students, waive inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation, and provide an alternate pathway to permanent status for those impacted, such as the humanitarian compassionate application process or a broad regularization program. Madam Chair, I'd like to first move this motion. I think that it would be important that this motion be adopted by the committee. As mentioned previously, this is an issue that I had written to the minister about long before this matter became a topic for this committee, calling for the minister to take action and raising the concerns of how these students have been victims of this fraudulent scheme. And the measures that we need the government to do is to stay the deportation, to waive inadmissibility based on misrepresentation by the fraudulent ghost consultants in submitting doctored up admissions letters unbeknownst to the students, and then finally to give the students a permanent pathway. As we know, when the students are faced with an issue of inadmissibility, that stays on the record for 5 years, and that applies for all immigration pathways. So this is very, very significant in terms of their future. And these students, I've met with many of them now, are just in such a terrible state. They've lost money, and they are stuck in a terrible situation. And some of them have deportation orders. Others have pending meetings with CBSA. And so as a first step, this, I think, is absolutely essential and necessary, Madam Chair. So I'll move this as my first motion, and then after this is dealt with, I have another one to move on.
Okay, so I have a speaking list, Mr. Dhaliwal and then Ms. Rempel-Garner. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just want to thank Madam Kwan for bringing this motion forward, and earlier Brad. And right now, Madam Chair, as Madam Kwan mentioned that she is concerned about that, certainly on this side, I, along with all Liberal members on this committee, as well as there are many members outside this committee, are very, very concerned about this issue as well. In fact, as Madam Kwan mentioned about the ministry, I would move the following amendment to add at the end of the motion, and that the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship for 1 hour, the Minister of Public Safety for 1 hour, and department officials for 1 hour each to provide a briefing on the situation for a total of 4 hours.
Mr. Dhaliwal, do you have this amendment in both official languages?
No, I don't. I just came up, and that's all I have, and it's totally
Mr.
acceptable.
Is it okay? Were you able to get the interpretation?
L'interprétation était...
The interpretation was unbelievable tonight, so it's okay by me.
Okay, so we have an amendment by Mr. Dhaliwal on the floor. Ms. Rempel-Garner?
Chair, just in response to Ms. Kwan's comments, I'd just like to build on it. The issue of individuals that disguise themselves as licensed practitioners that pretend to help people come to Canada and prey on them financially, it's something that's plagued our country for years. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse. This committee, I've sat on this committee for many years, and there's been many reports, and this situation is not getting better. So it's my hope that if we move forward with this motion, that the government really gets serious about this, because it puts people's lives at stake. It puts people at risk of human trafficking. It puts people at risk of being exploited in so many different ways. And this is something that we have to have compassion for, and that it's incumbent upon the government to act. So I just hope that with regard to the sub-amendment, that it is not designed to delay and obfuscate government action on this issue. There needs to be action now. There needed to be action weeks ago. And action not just in this circumstance, but also to the broader scope of some of the reforms that were made to deal with quote-unquote ghost consultants are clearly not working. The accreditation body to deal with immigration consultants, I also have concerns about that, whether or not these reforms have actually worked. But perhaps we can get to that. but certainly it shouldn't delay action for people who have been affected in this situation. Thank you.
Mr. Kimmich.
So I like the fact that the ministers are being added to this. We do have one sub-amendment we'll propose after we deal with this one. And I hope that the committee keeps itself open to allowing more than just the 4 hours to have either international students come in who are affected, but also Colleges and Institutes Canada, which is the governing body. It's a stakeholder group that represents all the colleges, because I have some of these internationals have given me the emails that they've received back and forth that were used in their inadmissibility hearings by the CBSA. And it is evident in there that IRCC, CBSA were doing the work of confirming that these acceptance letters, these fake acceptance letters, were in fact fraudulent 3 years. I have one case, it's 3 years after the fact. There's an email exchange with the registrar and the admissions officers at one of these colleges. So I have a hard time believing that the college network, so to speak, wasn't aware that there was fraudulent activity going around. And so we should keep it open to being the future. But on this sub-amendment, I'm on side with what Mr. Dhaliwal said.
Thank you. Seeing no further debate, we will have a vote on the amendment proposed by Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Clerk, if you can please state, do we have the consent from everyone about the amendment, or is everyone agreed? Okay, so anyone opposed to the amendment? No? So the amendment proposed by Mr. Dhaliwal is adopted. So we have the motion by Ms. Kwan as amended on the floor. Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just want to mention I did speak with the students today who are affected by this, and they are extremely growing impatient for some action. So they'll be very happy to see that finally this committee is taking some action. One of the things that I think we have to be very careful of is, at least from the Conservative perspective, we are all for not immediately deporting these students, because there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And we are also certainly open to them obtaining PR status. But we are concerned about creating a special pathway for these particular students. I think we have the pathways that are there, and I think all these students really want is to be considered like anyone else for permanent status. So they're not really asking for something special that way. And so I have a sub-amendment that I would like to propose in that regard, and that is the words that say towards the end where it says waive admissibility on the basis of misrepresentation and provide, the current one says, an alternative pathway to permanent status on those for those affected. I would like to delete an alternative pathway to permanent status and replace it with path to reapply for permanent residency. So it would read, let's see, and I'll start on call on the Canada Border Services Agency to immediately stay pending deportations of affected international students, comma, waive inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation, and provide a path to reapply for permanent residency for those impacted, and it carries on. Is that?
Can you please just let me write it down?
Yep.
A path to reapply?
A path to reapply for permanent residency.
As on the basis of misrepresentation and provide a path to reapply for permanent residency for those impacted.
Yep.
Okay. So we have a sub-amendment by Mr. Redekop on the floor. Ms. Lalonde wants to speak to it. Just to bring it on record, what Mr. Redekop said, this committee has adopted a motion earlier, and it was adopted, I think, like everyone was in favor of that legislation will hold a priority. So based on that, we had to get through the legislation to get on to any other business of the House. So that's why, like, the committee has been going through meetings on S245, because that's a motion we have passed by this committee that the legislation holds a priority. So I just wanted to put it on record that wanted to get through that legislation before we could do anything else. Ms. Lalonde, and then Mr. Dhaliwal.
Well, I'm sure my colleague. I'll let Mr. Dhaliwal go first, and maybe I'll share some thoughts after. I really want Mr. Dhaliwal to speak on this issue that is very, very important to all of us. But I know my colleague would really appreciate to speak. So.
Madam Chair, you recognize me?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I said, Mr. Dhaliwal.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Mr. Reddycobb or Brad on the other side, bringing this forward and the way he's thinking. In fact, the way he's thinking is, the students were here and they went through. They already went through the school. They got diplomas or degrees. They got the experience, and basically, the way he's saying is that students are not just beggars that just give them for granted immigration, because there are many other people that has gone through the same path as well. So there are probably hundreds of thousands of those other students that will feel that it's fair. So I think that is the approach he's taking. So they are competing with other students that came through other means, and that's what it meant. I would like Brad to put a reflection on this one as well, please, and if I'm right, the way he's thinking.
Ms. Lalonde, you want to speak, or?
Well, I just want to understand maybe the members' decisions for this sub-amendment. I think I hear my colleague, who's experts in this and certainly closer to the file than from an emotional, but I would love to hear or like to hear a little bit more, because my understanding, we are asking to delete alternative pathway, and we're adding provide a path to reapply to PR. I know the member mentioned that he spoke to several of those students, so does he have assurance that they already have they're reapplying? Did they apply it already? And maybe he can share some thoughts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you're speaking, one thing that it does raise in my mind that we maybe should think about is probably not every one of them has applied is a fair statement. I think most of them have, and that's where this issue came up, actually, was when they did apply, and that's when CBSA finally went and actually looked at the papers from 5 years ago and realized that they had made a mistake 5 years ago. And so, maybe it should say path to apply or reapply. But I think the key point is that I don't think anybody's asking for any special treatment. They just want to have the ability to apply for permanent residency or reapply as is necessary. So, I would be fine if we wanted to say a path to apply or reapply for permanent residency. That would work too, because that's the intent of it. So it's and I think what Mr. Dhaliwal said, I would agree with. He's correct.
What's the difference? That's my point.
So I have a speaking list, Ms. Rempel-Garner, Mr. Ali, and then Ms. Kwan. Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Just to build on Ms. Lalonde's question, I think what's happened in this situation is there's some parallels to what we were seeing with the facilitation letters in the Afghan study that we were looking at, where people thought that they had applied for programs, but they didn't actually apply because, and I'm looking at Mr. Reddycobb just for confirmation here, they thought they had applied, but essentially they were scammed in this circumstance, right? So the word reapply or apply, I think it's all being used in the same context, that there was intent by these people to apply formally. They thought they were applying through a correct path, but they were scammed. And I think that the difference from what isn't, I think the spirit of Mr. Reddycobb, from what I'm taking in Ms. Kwan's original text, it's the same thing. It's just that my colleague Mr. Reddycobb, Ms. Lalonde, what I think he's trying to say is there doesn't need to be a separate special program for the pathways already exist. So let's use the existing pathways that already exist to allow them to come in rather than create a special program. That's my understanding, and I think I would hope that there would be unanimity on that. But I think the key thing here is that we all agree that at the heart of the issue is that these people were scammed, and we have a duty of care to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and that they're not in a position of vulnerability. That due process is still applied. I don't think that anybody's saying due process shouldn't be applied, but. And so in that context, that's why I would support Mr. Redekop's amendment. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but that would be my understanding of what happened here.
Thank you, Mr. Ampalgana. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This issue is a really important issue, especially in Brampton. I see many students who are struggling to deal with this situation. But coming back to, and I have sympathy, and my office is assisting some of the students who fell into that situation of being banned for 5 years. But our constituency office is assisting those students. I think it's a record as a government. In 2016, we had 264,000 students. But in 2019, it was over 400,000 students. We had last year a situation, there was an article on IELTS. There's some student, they got that the IELTS were not genuine. It was an article. It was a college in Niagara. And now this is happening. Some student may be innocent, or some maybe we don't know until we go through a study on it. So I think we should allocate a time to study on this, to find out where something went wrong and how we deal with this issue without compromising integrity of our system, our IRCC. And one more question I wanted to ask Mr. Redekop, that he said that we should give PRs to those people who were here for 5 years. But then, they who applied, or? Yeah, they can apply. But my point is, do we deal with the refugees who were here from last 5 years in a similar way? Would that open another door? So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. But yes, this issue is really important, and I think we need more time to discuss this issue as a committee and bring forward suggestions or solutions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The situation with the students is devastating. I think we all agree with that. And I've talked to a number of the students now, quite a number of them actually, in the last number of days. And some of them have made an application, for example, to have their TRV be extended. And now their system is hung up. Others are going through a process trying to access and build towards a permanent pathway, which is ultimately what they want. In this motion that I've tabled, I'm saying to the government that we should acknowledge the sufferings that these students have undergone. One student I spoke with racked up $20,000 in legal fees as a result of this situation. They pay the fee to the unscrupulous consultant already. They pay student tuition to the school that they were supposed to go to. However, They didn't end up going to it because they didn't know that there was a fraudulent claim with that. And so they went to that school to try to get access to the school and couldn't. And then they went to another school afterwards because about all of this. So they paid double the educational fee in all of this situation. And they have sold their land at home. They have sold everything they own at home. They have nothing at home. This is the reality that they're faced with. So I think that my motion calling for the government to provide an alternate pathway for these students, it is the right thing to do. And alternate pathways could mean humanitarian compassionate stream. They still have to go through the process in the application. And I think it is the right thing to do. So I don't support the amendment. I'm sorry. The Conservatives took a different point of view for a long time. In their other motion, they said only to suspend deportation until they get a chance to testify. Well, I don't agree with that. I actually think that we should suspend the deportation, not just until they testify, until there is a full remedy for the problem, including the waiving of the inadmissibility based on misrepresentation and for that pathway to materialize. So I'm sorry, I don't support the amendment, and I would like the amendment to stay, my motion to stay as is.
Mr. Dhaliwal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, but I'm hearing. I certainly feel very bad about these students as well, and particularly the ones that are facing deportation that they have to go through this. But the way I see it is this, Madam Chair. So there are some members of the committee might not know the system, how it works. What happens is, the students get a letter from the school, and then the admission is done. Then the student directly pays fees to the institution, right? So what happens is, because there are single cases that have come to me, so they will do this, but when they, this will be also done by the agent somehow. But when they land here, then they find out that, then the agent tells them, oh, no, just go to some other university. This school did not, you didn't have admission in here, or this didn't even exist. So then what happens is the student takes admission into the other school, right? So basically, then they start the life as some other student, 400-some-thousand students that Mr. Ali mentioned earlier. So they are in the same lineup. So the main focus right now here that I see, that it is the fraudulent letter. So what damage did that fraudulent letter do to those students? So what happened is they took the letter, now they're facing a 5-year deportation ban. I would support Madam Kwan's on this one, that this should be abolished right away. That should not be on their record. Because the reason is because they were not aware of this letter that was given to them that was fraudulent. But on the other hand, where dear friend Mr. Radikoff on the other side that brought the motion forward. So now basically I think he's saying is they got in here, for example, so this letter was an issue. We already dealing with that fraudulent letter should not put 5-year ban on those students. So then if those students have already taken an admission in the other college and they have gone through that process, they already have the number of hours that they need, the qualification that they need, IELTS exam that they need, and all other requirements, medical, criminality check. So they are the ones who should be given immigration instead of just putting a blanket thing on the whole thing. Because if we put a blanket thing, we are not certain. So now they're saying there's 700. I don't think there are 700 students. So far, the number I see is about 200 or whatever the number is. Out of that 200, some of them might have already got the immigration. They have gone through the system already. And some of them have already completed all the requirements that they needed to make sure that they have the number of points that they need in the express entry, or they have applied under, some provincial, like in BC, for example, BC BNP programs. So there are a lot of pathways already there that students have followed. But the major issue that they're facing is the deportation and this fraudulent letter. So if they got the admission here, they are in the same lineup as any other students, those 400,000 students that came in, because that letter was the only thing, and now the letter is not going to have any impact on their application. So is that the line, Mr. Redikoff is thinking that he's going, so it's fair to these students that has come under this fraudulent letter, and it's also fair to those 400 and some thousand students that are already here studying.
Ms. Rampal Garner.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I just wanted to address Mr. Ali's concern on fairness, which I think is fair for us to talk about. So the motion as it's originally worded reads, provide an alternate pathway to permanent status for those impacted. The amendment that Mr. Redikoff is suggesting is provide a path to reapply for permanent residence for those impacted. I think it was Mr. Dhaliwal who suggested perhaps a sub-amendment to this sub-amendment, which would say a path to apply or reapply. But the implication in that Mr. Redikoff's amendment catches is the fairness one, Mr. Ali. It suggests that we want to make sure that we're saying that we're not going to create a special stream for people, but we're going to allow them, if they were deemed inadmissible because of the fraudulent letters, that we would allow them to reapply or apply, as the case may be, through normal processes and due process. I think it's really important for us to accept this amendment, not just in this case, because I don't know what's happening, 'tis the season, but our committee this session has been seized with fraudulent letters of all sorts. And I think we, as parliamentarians, we have to be careful in not inadvertently creating a pull or an incentive for ghost consultants to be like, okay, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to issue these fraudulent letters, and then I'm going to tell people, well, guess what? The committee is now going to say that we have an alternative pathway. And I know that that's not what, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I know that's not the spirit of Ms. Kwan's amendment. But I do think that it behooves us to be precise and say that we understand the humanitarian nature of the situation, but we also want to make sure that we're using existing processes and due process so that we're not either being unfair to Mr. Ali's component, that we're being equitable, but that we're also not creating a pull factor by saying when this type of fraud happens, we're going to create special circumstances, which, frankly, is what we risk happen in the Afghan letter case as well, because there are civil cases right now. So I think we just need to be precise as a committee, and that we shouldn't be binding the government in a pull factor. And I think that's the spirit of Mr. Redikoff's amendment here.
Rampal Garner. Next I have is Mr. Redikoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, just to be very clear, I think we're all kind of saying the same thing here. We want this to be fair. We want the process to be fair. Mr. Dhaliwal said that, fair to everyone, and I agree. We don't want anybody to have special treatment, and by the same token, we want these students to not be penalized by a 5-year wait because of something that they had no control over. So that's why I think it is important that they have a chance to apply or reapply, notwithstanding the fact that they have this potentially this 5-year issue. So I think we're all saying the same thing. So if you like my words, great. If you don't, that's great too. But I suggest we vote.
I have a speaking list, so we will have to exhaust the list. Ms. Lalonde.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I certainly want to maybe bring a perspective, and I hear certainly my colleague from the Conservative on this issue. I do believe, though, we will all agree that the victims, that the victims of the frauds do need to have a pathway to PR, permanent residence, for those that are listening, and certainly shouldn't have additional barriers just because they were tricked or. So my questions, I think, and I'm trying, that's why I was asking the honorable member to better understand, because I don't see the real difference actually in the motion of Mrs. Kwan in her within the news release, that it would say, let's say, a pathway to apply or reapply, or an alternative pathway, because I see this as being the same. So I don't want to go on, but I would feel stronger to keep the wording the way it is, because I don't think it makes any difference. And I think we collectively, like we just agree, we only want the best thing for those students, and we want to give them an alternative pathway.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I have a multi-diversity riding. I think also we have to be fair. I am totally feel with the student and should find a way. But when I receive people and I receive deportation from people who has almost similar issue, like coming here and they were advised, coming here as tourists, they were advised to apply to become permanent resident, and they believe that, and they stay 3, 4, 5 years, and then refuse deportation. So what can I tell those people when they come to me and said, why you prefer you take this, you work hard to settle the issue of those people, those students, and not us? Just this what I'm feeling, and I wonder how can I face those people. However, after I said that, I could tell you, looking very, very logic, what Ms. Kwan comments, and I am ready to support her proposal as it's presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alcuri. Mr. Brunel dissent? No? Okay. So we will go for a vote on the amendment proposed by Mr. Reddycop. Mr. Clerk, if you can please take the vote. This is the vote on the amendment proposed by Mr. Reddycop. No, it's an amendment. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Ali.
No.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
No.
Mr. El Khoury.
No.
Madame Kayabaga.
Contre.
Madame Lalonde.
No.
Mr. Kimmich.
Yes.
Mr. Redekop.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel Garner.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Brunet Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
No.
Yeas 5, nays 6.
Okay, so the amendment is defeated. The amendment is defeated. Mr. Kimmich.
So, Madam Chair, just because you had mentioned it, that this committee has passed a motion to ordering the business that we do, I have an amendment to make just to make sure that this is the next business that we undertake. So it would be just to add after the words at the bottom of the as amended motion now. So this would be after and that, it would be comma, notwithstanding any usual practice or previous motion adopted by this committee, comma. That would be the amendment, and it goes back to.
So can you repeat, like it will be after the last regularization program?
It would be after and that at the bottom. So it says that's the part that Mr. Dhaliwal added. He added and that the committee invite the Minister of IRCC. So and that, comma, notwithstanding any usual practice or previous motion adopted by this committee, comma, motion adopted, yeah. The committee invite the Minister of IRCC to minister. So just to make sure that this is the next business that this committee undertakes.
Can you just please fully repeat your
Sure, that's okay.
Amendment?
So my amendment would be after the words and that the, but before the word committee invite. Is it clear? Hopefully now. So, comma, notwithstanding any usual practice or previous motion adopted, comma, the committee invite the Minister of IRCC. And it goes on. Is that?
Keelan? To get this, the amendment proposed by Mr. Kimmich into the motion.
Donc, on fait d'autres choses en premier avant les invitations. Donc, même si on pense à...
We have multiple drafts.
I will have the clerk read the motion so that it is clear for everyone.
So the amendment proposes to add, after the words "and that," in the last section of the motion, quote, "notwithstanding any usual practice or previous motion adopted by the committee," comma, end quote. En français, après les mots.
In French, after the words "et que" in the last bit of the main motion, and notwithstanding all habitual practices and previous motions adopted by this committee. End of quote.
Okay, so we have an amendment proposed by Mr. Kimmich on the floor. Mr. Redekop?
So just to be very clear, I think our intention on doing this is so that we get to this immediately, so that there's no other business that will supersede this. And so that's the intention of this, and I would hope that that's the intention of all the committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's Ms. Kwan, that motion put forward. It's crystal clear. It deals with the issue. I think we should move on to, instead of wasting time bringing forward amendments to that motion. It is a clear and it's a deal with the issue, and I agree with it. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Briefly, Chair, just to your comment earlier about how we were dispensing with Bill S-245, and that's why we weren't dealing with Mr. Redekop's earlier motion, which I believe precipitated this debate on this issue. Not to challenge your ruling, but to be fair, the standing orders do allow committees to essentially control their own destiny, and motions can supersede business, as we saw with the motion on Bill S-245 that changed how the bill was, the scope of the amendments that were delivered. I think what Mr. Redekop's motion does is clarify that there will be no delay. There will be no other business that will precede this particular issue. And we're just enshrining in that so that things don't accidentally get scheduled instead of this particular study, particularly since Mr. Dhaliwal has now, and we've agreed to add some more time for study on this issue. So I support this amendment because it clearly says that this is the next order of business. This is direction that the committee is giving to you, Chair, and I would urge my colleagues to support it for that reason.
Ms. Kwan and then Mr. Dhaliwal. Ms. Kwan?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't think the amendment is actually necessary. The orders of precedence that we had is actually on bills, and Bill S245 was actually before us, so then we actually had to deal with that. And so now that that has been dealt with, it is my full intention that this be our next study. I think that there's a commitment here from committee members to do that. So I don't think this is actually necessary, Madam Chair.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as far as I see, to me, this should be the next priority as well. So I personally see that everyone is on board. Why don't you suspend the meeting for a few minutes, Madam Chair, and then let them talk among them to come up with yes or no. But I think whether we vote no to Mr. Redikoff's motion or we agree with Ms. Kwan, it is the same thing. So I just want, for the sake of this committee, just suspend for a few minutes and let them talk in between. If it's the same thing, let's move forward, and this should be the next priority for this committee.
Okay, Madam President.
Madam Chair, let's be efficient tonight. Everyone knows how they're going to vote, and everyone knows the wording that's before us on the motion, amendments, sub-amendments. So I think we're sufficiently intelligent to know what we're faced with. We can quickly vote on this without debate. We don't even need to suspend. We just need to get to the vote. I think we're sufficiently intelligent for that, and we should get going with the work, Madam Chair.
Okay. We should go for a vote. Is it the will of the committee to suspend? No? Okay. So seeing no further debate, we will go for a vote. We are voting on the amendment proposed by Mr. Redikoff.
Madam Chair, you're going to record a vote. Could you just do it by show of hands? It'll go a lot faster.
So we'll take the vote.
Mr. Ali.
No.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
No.
Mr. El-Khoury.
No.
Madame Kayabaga.
Contre.
Madame Lalonde.
No.
Mr. Kmitch.
Yes.
Mr. Redikoff.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Brunet-Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
No.
Yeas 5, nays 6.
The amendment is defeated, and we have the motion as amended on the floor. Ms. Kwan.
I'm hoping that we're ready to vote on my motion.
Okay, seeing no further debate, we will vote on the motion proposed by Ms. Kwan as amended. Mr. Clerk, if you can please take the vote.
Mr. Ali.
Yes.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Yes.
Mr. El-Khoury.
Oui.
Madame Kayabaga.
Pour.
Madame Lalonde.
Pour.
Mr. Kmitch.
Yes.
Mr. Redikoff.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Brunet-Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
Yes.
Yeas 11, nays 0.
So the motion as amended is adopted. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd now like to move this motion that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study into the targeted exploitation scheme faced by 700 Punjabi international students in which they were unknowingly defrauded by a ghost immigration consultant who used inauthentic admission letters for their student visa application, that this study be comprised of 2 meetings, and that the study consider A, how this situation was allowed to happen, B, why fraudulent documents were not detected until years later when the students began to apply for permanent status, C, the significant harm experienced by students, including financial loss and distress, D, measures necessary to help the students to have their deportation stayed, inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation, waive and provide a pathway to permanent status, and E, D, the committee also examine how to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. Madam Chair, I'll be very quick about the intention around this motion. I think it's self-explanatory. I think we need to do all of these elements. The big difference I want to highlight, though, between this motion and the one that the Conservatives had moved earlier, that they say is similar, is substantively actually different. Because in their motion, they only call for the deportation to be stayed until witnesses present at this committee. That is not good enough. We need the deportation stayed in a substantive way so that the pathways of ensuring the inadmissibility based on misrepresentation is waived, and also for permit pathway option is available to them. The other piece that is also significantly different is that the Conservative motion does not talk about waiving inadmissibility. If you don't waive inadmissibility, these students have on their record a 5-year ban. And that is very significant for their future. They would not be able to get any immigration pathways through, even if it's a study permit or a work permit or anything like that. So that is an essential component, in my view, to this. And finally, to the last point, a permanent pathway. This is what the students want, and we need to make sure that we address that as well. So there's substantive difference, and that's why I supported the adjournment of those motions, because I would not support the motion in any event, and I would support this one that is much more holistic in addressing the issues for the students.
So we have a motion on the floor, moved by Ms. Kwan. I have a speaking list, Mr. Kimmich and then Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Kimmich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm in agreement with this motion. I do have another motion after this, though, so I just want to give you notice. It is on notice already. I thought that first we do a study and then we come up with solutions to problems, and not the other way around typically. There was always the option of accepting, we had 4 votes before we finally come to international students that my colleague, Mr. Redekop, had tried to do at this committee. And at any one of those times, Ms. Kwan could have come to us with wording she wanted added into our motion. I thought ours was better, but we're always open to making it even better and having different wording. But I support this motion and will be voting for it.
Mr. Dhaliwal? No. Mr. Dhaliwal, you are on mute.
Madam Chair, no, I'm not here to debate whose motion is better, but I just want to thank each and every member on this committee, finally, supporting those students that are facing this difficulty. And I don't think anyone is not in favor that this, 5-year ban based on that letter, should be taken away, and that deportation should be stayed, whether it is state or whatever, because even if it was to do the study and stay afterwards, I think everybody probably meant the same thing right now, and there was no from this side that we on even 245, because we were always saying this to our Conservative friends and NDP friends, of course, that once we have finished this, and then we will deal with this issue. And I'm glad that each and every party supported this, dealing with this, and the motion proposed by Madam Kwan, amended by myself here, is gone through, and let's get on and see, even as individuals, if people, students, those come to you as an individual, let's pursue those cases to the minister, IRCC, as well as public safety, to make sure, that they can feel that support is there, that we are standing with them shoulder to shoulder. It's not that we should play politics with this issue, make this issue a political football, so as those students at the end still keep on suffering. So that's where, Madam Chair, I wanted to leave that it's not only the Liberal members on this committee. I can tell you, Madam Chair, there are many, many other members that have approached me, that are talking to us as a group, and we have already met with the IRCC department, Minister department, as well as CBSA to make sure that we are up to date on this issue, and we are supporting as much as we could. So on behalf of all Liberal caucus here, and I want to show my support to these vulnerable students.
Next I have is Mr. Reddycop and then Mr. Ali. Mr. Reddycop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said last weekend and this week too, I've spoken with the students, and they were very frustrated that no actions were happening at this committee, and I think they'll be very pleased to see that things are happening now. We have to remember, though, that Lovepreet Singh is a person who is still scheduled to be deported very soon, and so this does not solve that problem. So there are still issues that are very urgent that the government needs to address here. But at the beginning of the meeting, I said I was going to take a different approach, and instead of moving my motion and having it get voted down again, I was going to try something different. And I think that's what's happened here tonight, and it doesn't matter to me if it's my motion that's approved or whatever we do. I just want to see some action happen, and I see action happening here tonight. And I think the students that are probably watching this right now will be very excited to see that. And so I'm excited to do that, and I will support this motion if it means that we can move forward with this. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank all my colleagues for voting on this motion. International students, they are in devastating situation I've seen in Brampton. Many of my constituents approached me, and our Brampton team, MPs, also numerous times had a discussion with me on this issue. I think we need to have empathy for those students, and we should not exploit the situation and play politics on this issue of those innocent students. This motion could have been passed way earlier if we didn't, in this committee, if we didn't waste so much time on certain amendments on S-245. So I just wanted to thank all the members. But at the same time, I like to request my colleagues, those students, international students, they have gone through a lot, and they're going through a lot. Let's not play politics on that. And they know this side of the aisle, their record on immigration and their record on international student, it's amazing. So they know the genuineness. But my request to all my colleagues, let's not exploit the situation. Let's not politicize the situation. Let's move on to motion moved by my colleague, Ms. Kwan, and to deal with this issue is as soon as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next I have is Ms. Kwan.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. In terms of the students who are faced with this situation, many of them have actually reached out to me. I've spoken with many of them, and I'm working with them to collect their information, to get their consent, and had been in conversation with the minister already about the situation, to get their files right in front of the ministers and to have, hopefully, a positive outcome for them. In the case of Mr. Lovepreet, he is indeed faced with deportation imminently, and so there's an urgent file. In fact, I was just on an email with him just now with respect to that. So, so absolutely, we need to do that. And the work from this committee, and as I explained to the students as well, as anxious as they were, is that this committee has no authority to waive or stay deportations. Only the Minister of Public Safety can do that, or the federal court. However, what we can do, of course, is look into the situation and explore different options as recommendations to the government, and then, of course, to see how we can prevent this from happening again. But most urgently, for the students who are faced with this situation right now, we need to actually take a different path. And the best path, in my view, in moving forward, is to bring their cases individually forward to the minister's attention and to have it addressed. And that's exactly what I'm doing with my staff team.
Sep?
Ouais, les
The Conservatives said they will vote in favor. Liberals and NDP is bringing forward the motion, so they will vote yes, and Bloc is going to vote yes. So, Madam Chair, if we can just vote on this.
Mr. Dhaliwal, you want to speak? Your hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Madam Kwan has already clearly said for whatever number of years, 13, 14 years, I've been MP. Cases like ABC, I'm not going to name anyone because every client has a privacy or confidentiality that we can't leak their names on this. In fact, we should not be even discussing on this year their names and the emails that we are getting from them. In fact, that all that information is very, very confidential. And in previously, Madam Chair, there are lots of cases that has come to our office. And we have taken those as an individual approach to stay their deportation, and that's what Madam Kwan meant. So basically, exactly, I was going to appeal other members on this committee and the students as well. So they should go to their respective members right way. So they take their authorization to talk to CBSA, and once they get in touch with the CBSA, they get all the information, so they can get in touch with the Minister of Safety, Public Safety, that they can request why they're not danger that they will run away, and I'm sure under these circumstances, Minister will look at very favorably. So this will get done. So basically, individual cases should not sit home and wait for anything. In fact, the people that are already facing deportation, they should go to their respective members whose riding they live in and tell that member to stop that deportation.
Dhaliwal, Ms. Kaya Baga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to delay this any longer than it has, but I just wanted to put some things on the record because I did hear my colleague, Mr. Redekop, say that he'd stated that we were trying to vote against this motion, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that we do not delay S245, which had many people's lives in jeopardy, and I'm glad that we were able to get to that point. I also think that it's important to strike a balance between what we're doing right now. We're deeply concerned about the students, and that's really important to note. And this is a really important legislation, and we've received hundreds of letters from people begging for it to be passed. And I think that we can go by clause, considering that it's typically a 2-hour process. And this is something that the Conservatives have dragged for over 30 hours, and they showed no signs of stopping this. So we're here right now in this moment because of the 30-hour process that we just finished going through with the clause by clause with S245.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Kaya Baga. If I can request all the members to avoid side conversations, talking across the aisle. A member has the floor, member is speaking, let her finish.
I want to point out some major flaws in the motion, which is that there's a part where he wants to drag these vulnerable students out to testify and essentially prove to committee that they are innocent. And it's honestly despicable, Madam Speaker, because they've gone through already a lot, and I don't think that they need to go through that any further. I think one of my colleagues just mentioned that it's unethical for us to even mention their names. We are seized with this issue. We want to study the cause, and we want to find the solutions and not waste any more time questioning if the students were complicit or not, which is what the Conservatives are essentially trying to do. And I hope that we do not do that. I want to clarify that in the motion that this is in the motion that my colleague, Mr. Redekop, has brought, which insinuates that we can bring the students. And
Point of order, Madam Chair.
We shouldn't do that.
Ms. Kaya Baga, 1 second.
Are we debating my motion now? Because I'm happy to, if that's what we're doing. Are we debating my motion? Just to clarify?
No, it's the Ms. Kwan's motion we are debating.
Oh. Okay.
Okay, Ms. Kaya Baga.
Well, I'd like to finish, Madam Chair, by saying that we support Mrs. Kwan's motion, and I hope that we can remain within the lines of ethics and we do not drag this for another 30 hours, as we all know that there are people's lives that are on the line right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Brunel de Sepp.
Oui, bonjour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I understand is that the Liberals are angry because the Conservatives took a lot of time for the passage of S245, and tonight we have decided to take a lot of time to say nothing at the end of it all, because everyone is in agreement of the motion that's before us. So to my Liberal friends, if they want to do this, the Bloc Québécois is also capable of speaking and reading from books. So I am ready to do my work and get to work immediately. And if you want to stop with these games, it's high time that we did that. Because if you accuse someone of doing something else, then you don't do the same yourself. Madam Chair, it wasn't necessary for our colleague to use such words. We are all elected to do our work, Madam Chair.
No further debate. We will go for a vote. Ms. Kabag, are you raising your hand? No. Can you lower your hand, please? We will go for a vote on Ms. Kwan's motion. Mr. Clerk, if you can please take the vote.
Mr. Ali? Yes. Mr. Dhaliwal?
Yes.
Mr. El Khoury?
Yes.
Madame Kayabaga?
Pour.
Madame Lalonde?
Pour.
Mr. Kimich?
Oui.
Mr. Redekop?
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence? Oh, sorry, didn't know the
Maguire.
substitution. Mr.
Yes.
Maguire?
Yes.
He's back.
Mr. Brunet-Doucet?
Oui.
Ms. Kwan?
Yes.
Yeas 11, nays 0.
The motion is adopted. Mr. Kamich?
So, like I told you, Madam Chair, this motion has been on the notice since March 27th. I move that the committee report the following to the House: that Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza is facing political persecution in the Russian Federation, including a show trial with high treason charges following his public condemnation of the unjustified and illegal war by Russia against Ukraine, that Vladimir Kara-Murza has survived 2 assassination attempts by poisoning, including in 2015 and 2017, and that he is currently imprisoned in Russia and his health is failing, that Vladimir Kara-Murza is the recipient of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize awarded by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and is a senior fellow to the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Therefore, the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration calls on the Government of Canada to grant honorary Canadian citizenship to Vladimir Kara-Murza and demand that the Russian Federation set him free. Madam Chair, that's the motion. It's been on notice. And I'll briefly explain why this is still important today, because he's still in jail. So he's 41 years old. He is the same age I am. He has 3 kids. His wife, Evgenia, has been here before, and she has spoken to members of parliament. We are trying to reach an agreement with all parties on a UC motion. To understand, we're still having trouble getting there. He's been arrested since April of 2022. He's again suffered unjust treatment by his captors. He is one of the official opposition leaders in Russia. It is him and Alexei Navalny who have basically led the way defending the democratic rights of people who oppose Vladimir Putin's regime and the Kremlin. His health has declined. He's lost about 40 pounds since his trial began. He did not have 40 pounds to lose, by the way. That'd be like me losing 40 pounds. He's had 2 poisoning attempts. Both of them are suspected to have been directed personally by President Vladimir Putin. From his past 2 visits to Russia in 2015 and 2017, he's already been diagnosed with polyneuropathy. He's lost feelings in both feet and one arm. Even under Russian law, such a diagnosis should lead to his release, and it's very likely that he will die soon unless he is released. Unfortunately, yet predictably, Russian courts found him guilty, sentenced him to 25 years in jail. I will also note for the record that there is a statement by the chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committees of various European states in continental Europe that condemned the sentencing of Vladimir Kara-Murza. And all political prisoners know this. I have met a few in my time here on Parliament Hill. That if we do not promote their names, if we don't have them front and center in the public, that they will be forgotten, and regimes like the one that Vladimir Putin leads will murder their opponents in jail. They have shown before they have done so. Boris Nemtsov was murdered on a bridge right outside the Kremlin in the evening. He was shot to death in a very brazen murder. Russian opposition leaders, Russians who support democracy in the Russian Federation. It is a tough life being a member of the opposition there. I count my blessings I am in Canada here. It is very difficult for them, and granting him honorary citizenship would be the least we could do to support such, someone who's basically given his life for the democratic movement, human rights, the free speech, liberty. The only thing he said that wound him before the Russian courts was that the invasion of Ukraine was illegal and unjust, and he continues to oppose Vladimir Putin's regime, the kleptocrats in the Kremlin. So I hope that we can pass this and bring it to the House so the House can pass it as well, and that eventually the Senate may do something similar. There are 6 honorary citizenships that have been granted, I believe, in the past 30 or 40 years. This would be our 7th. I can't think of anyone more worthy than Vladimir Karamurza.
I want to say thank you to my colleague for bringing this forward. And I think on the principles, there's so many areas we would agree on his motion. I just want to maybe speak, and I know I don't want to upset anyone in this committee, but I think it's important on this motion that we also set some stage. When you think about ordinary citizenship, Canadian citizenship, it is not the discretion of the Minister of RCC. I think it's important that this is on record. It is purely symbolic. It is an act at the House part. And as my honorable colleague mentioned, since 2001, there has been 6 individuals. One, unfortunately, was revoked, but it was done through a unanimous consent motion that was proposed in the House for a joint resolutions to be passed to grant that honor. So I think it's important that everybody understands that the recipients also of that honor does not receive any of the rights held by a Canadian citizen. For example, the ability to receive or hold a Canadian passport, nor are they permitted to exercise any duties associated with the Canadian citizenship. I think it's important that we realize and we put this on record about what we are proposing to do in that essence. I think my honorable colleague did mention how horrible it is for this wonderful person who, through his perspective, is actually challenging and contesting and opposing what the current regime of Vladimir Putin is doing. So I think we can agree on all that aspect of what we want to do here. For all these reasons, and I hope that I'll have the support of my colleagues because I think the principle is right, but we need to ensure that the language is actually reflecting on past practices and what exactly it means of what we would be saying. So for that reason, Madam Chair, I would like to ask to propose friendly amendment to... give me a second. Oh, sorry, it's my French and English language that I want to make sure. I would like to propose an amendment, actually, to my colleague's motion. And if I can read it in both official language here, I will do this. So what I would like to do is that we would, and I think what is easier, Madam Chair, is maybe I can read the motion the way I would like to see the amendment going forward. So,
Ms. Lalonde, are you proposing an amendment to the motion moved by Mr. Kimmich?
Pardon me, Madam Chair? Excuse me, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. So I will say, so I move the following amendment. I would like to delete the word that the committee report the following to the House and replace them with that the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration issue a press release stating, and also delete the words the Government of Canada and replace them with Parliament. And Madam Chair, could I read as it would be amended to help our translate? Yes. Yes. So the amended motion in English would read that the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration issue a press release stating that Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza is facing political persecution in the Russian Federation, including a show trial with high treason charges following his public condemnation of the unjustified and illegal war by Russia against Ukraine, that Vladimir Kara-Murza has survived 2 assassination attempts by poisoning, including in 2015 and 2017, and that he is currently in prison in Russia and his health is failing. That Vladimir Kara-Murza is the recipient of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize awarded by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and is a senior fellow to the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Therefore, the committee calls on Parliament to grant honorary Canadian citizenship to Vladimir Kara-Murza and demand that the Russian Federation set him free. Et je peux répéter en français.
And I can repeat in French.
Ms. Lalonde has proposed an amendment, so we have an amendment on the floor.
So I'm fine with the second part where the Government of Canada is stricken out in Parliament, but I'm not fine with the news release because the news release, I can put out a news release. I can tell you that Vladimir Putin doesn't care about my news release. All of us here at this table are sanctioned by the Russian Federation. All of us are banned from entering that country, which I wear as a happy badge of honor. When the initial list came out, I was not on it for some reason, or a bunch of us were not on it, and it was very difficult for me to deal with my family because they thought that I was impugning my character somehow not to be sanctioned by the regime. The first part is not acceptable. We've done this before. The committee has put out a news release, and it goes nowhere. There was one on minority Christians being persecuted overseas, and there were 2 other ones earlier in the year. Those were quickly forgotten. The things that are not forgotten and that other regimes pay attention to is when Parliament and committees of this Parliament act and do things. We've recognized genocides as acts of Parliament. We act. We pass unanimous consent motions. Those things people pay attention to. And to me, although they are non-binding, as we say, that's still the way we've done it before, where we've named others to become honorary citizens. And this is a way through Parliament to do so. So I don't support the sub-amendment, even though half of it is okay with me. A news release is not enough. I would like to see this reported back to the House. Right, the amendment is simply not enough. It needs to be as is. It won't help. The Russian Federation won't care. They won't pay attention to what we do here. News release just won't do it. There are other parliaments which are acting as well, and time is of the essence.
Mitch, seeing no, so we have amendment on the floor. Yes, Ms. Lalonde.
I'm not sure when, but I just want to clarify maybe because of the French and what I said, I want to make sure that it was very clear not on the amendment, but on the suggestions of the revocation of one of the individuals. So we can talk about the Mr. Kimmick motion or sub-amendment, but I just, at one point, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure on record that I want to share some thoughts.
So we have an amendment on the floor proposed by Ms. Lalonde. Are you accepting that as a friendly amendment from Mr. Kimmich, or we are like?
No.
Okay. So we have an amendment on the floor. We will take a vote. We are voting on the amendment by Ms. Lalonde. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Ali.
Yes.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Yes.
Mr. El Khoury.
Yes.
Madame Kayabaga.
Pour.
Madame Lalonde.
Pour.
Mr. Kimmich.
Contre.
Mr. McGuire.
Against.
Mr. Redekop.
Against.
Ms. Rempel-Garner,
Against.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe,
Contre.
Ms. Kwan.
For.
Yeas 6, nays 5.
The amendment is adopted. So we have the motion as amended on the floor. No debate. We will take a vote. Yes, Mr. Maguire, you wanted to speak?
Yeah,
Yes, Mr. Maguire.
I guess I never thought I'd ever be in a position to be able to talk about this as much in such an important position, but Boris Nemkov, as my colleague has just indicated, was shot on the bridge by the Kremlin as a leader of the Russian opposition. And I was there with one of my Liberal colleagues, Scott Simms, who was filling in for Larry Bagnall when we were on the Arctic Standing Committee of Parliamentarians for the Arctic Region, SPAR. This was about 2018, somewhere in there, maybe earlier. And Tom will know probably more about the exact date of that shooting. And I had the opportunity with Scott to walk up on the bridge that night, 6 months after this gentleman had been shot. And the flowers were still being laid every night on that bridge in honor of this young man who gave up his life as a Russian leader. And the guards were there to make sure that there was no other extraordinary events taking place on that bridge, but they could not stop the Russian people from placing those flowers and those memorial cards and gifts on that bridge. And there were so many that they would take them away each week so that there would be room for the people that were still bringing them 6 months after this shooting. And so I beseech my colleagues to do more than what is in this resolution now, this motion tonight. But I wanted to let them know that I and the Liberal were there very much in favor of supporting what happened to that young man in Russia that night. And I think it's actually imperative that Canada do far more than just turn a blind eye to this. So thank you.
Just to put on record, Madam Chair, and I want to be very, very strong on this. When I mention, unfortunately, the revocation of this person, I didn't mean unfortunately it was revoked. It was fully deserving that it was revoked for Mrs. Aung San Suu Kyi in 2018. Thank you.
For the debate, we will go for a vote on the motion as amended. Mr. Clerk, if you can please take the vote on the motion as amended.
Mr. Ali.
Yes.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Yes.
Mr. Erkouri.
Yes.
Madame Kayabaga.
Who?
Madame Lalonde.
Pour.
Mr. Kimmich.
For.
Mr. Maguire.
For.
Mr. Redekop.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Yes.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
Yes.
Yeas 11, nays 0.
The motion as amended is adopted. Adjourn the meeting. I need some guidance on the scheduling. Yes, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much. That was what I was going to raise in terms of scheduling. I would like to ask that the two motions that we passed today with respect to inviting the minister and officials to come, and then the second motion in terms of doing the study to be the next item that we deal with for this committee.
The committee's guidance on how we want to schedule. Before we rise for the summer break, we are left with 4 meetings. June 12th, June 14th, June 19th, June 21st. Right now, we had scheduled a meeting for June 19th with Mark Garneau for 1 hour and the D&D officials for 1 hour. That was scheduled. So now today we have passed two motions. So the first one, which was passed in regards to inviting the Minister for Immigration and the Minister for Public Safety, we need to have two meetings. And the second motion, which was passed, also states to have two meetings. So that means that if we need to study these two motions, we need 4 meetings. So should we cancel that meeting on June 19th with the Honorable Mark Garneau and the D&D officials and schedule these 4 meetings? In regards to ministers' availability, the first motion which we passed, we are asking the Minister for Immigration and the Public Safety to appear before the committee. We will have to schedule that. I'm not sure whether anyone would be able to come in on Monday or not. So I would like to get some guidance from the committee. How would you like me to proceed? Mr. Reddycop.
I think the priority from my perspective would be the initial motion that we passed where we invite the 2 ministers. That would be the priority, and that could be done, I would hope that could be done next week. I think we can cover off a lot of the issues in those 2 meetings. I'm debating the other 2. I mean, Garneau would be great to come in. He's already scheduled. There's a chance we won't have the meeting on the Wednesday, potentially, being probably the last day of Parliament. So is it that one, or is it the next day? The Friday. Okay, well, anyway, there's a potential that won't happen, though, I would say. There's odds. The odds are there.
Yes.
Yes. If we base it on last year. I'm telling you something, basing it on last year, that meeting wouldn't happen, so we wouldn't be able to complete that anyway. The other problem with I guess, just to throw it out there, that even if we complete those 2 meetings, we still have to write a report, and that wouldn't happen until the fall, in which time we may have forgotten a lot of what we heard. So that would be an argument for doing it then. So those are just some of my thoughts. I'm not necessarily saying one thing or the other. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, if you will. Maybe that's a dangerous thing to do, but I think for sure the priority should be the 2 ministers in the first study that we approved, or the first motion we approved tonight. Thank you.
Ms. Lalonde.
I would say, considering that there's maybe a perspective from my honorable colleagues about our timeline in the House before we rise, I would say right now we should focus on sending the invites, Madam Chair. I think I don't think none of us can control what days the ministers are able to come, and we know how sometimes restricting any decisions that we make is restricting our ability to be more broad. So I would say to the committee, let's send the invite and let's see the response.
Okay, so based on the input from the members, I think the desire is to go through the first motion first. So we will have to send an invite to 2 ministers. So we are requesting 1 hour from each minister and 1 hour from each of the officials. So just in case, if for Monday we cannot get any minister, should we just schedule the 2 officials, if they are also available? We will have to check what is the availability of the officials for 1 hour with the IRCC and the 1 hour with the public safety. Or the members would like to have the minister and the officials together, for each meeting. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it doesn't matter which sequence they come in, as long as we talk to all, and probably the department even will be probably the best to start with, because they will be able to lay out all the information that we needed, and then members of parliament will be able to put questions to the ministers. But to me, as long as this takes priority, it doesn't matter what sequence it takes.
And then Mr. Reddycop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm fine to have officials come first. If we can arrange for the ministers to be here, and then the ministers can come after, I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think at the end of the day, what's important here is whatever's best to get the students studied is the way to go. So, if we can move this forward, getting this issue of the fake acceptance letters that we've been discussing, whatever makes it happen faster is the way that we should go on that.
And would members like to keep this meeting on June 19th as scheduled with Mr. Garno and the DND officials? Mr. Reddycop?
Just one other thing I was going to mention is that if it turns out there is nobody available on Monday, I'm quite certain that we could get the students to come in. I'm sure they'd be very interested in coming and testifying and speaking to us too. So that's another thought.
Decided that we will go by with the first motion first, so then we will have to deal with that. So let me get the invites out to the ministers. Like, I can't really say like how the availabilities are until or unless we send the invites and get some answers from them, so I can update the committee as we hear from them. Yes, Ms. Lalonde.
I personally think we send the invites. Ministers should come first. I think that's always been the procedure of this House. Let's continue. Let's see what the response will be. I cannot control the schedule of anybody, and my understanding is I'm not sure until when we sit in this House, according to my honourable colleagues. So, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you to all of you. So I will work with the clerk and we will see how the availabilities are. And based on those availabilities, we will schedule the next 4 meetings, 4 or 3, whatever the number is, and I will update the members. Yes, Ms. Kwan.
And could the clerk also send to all of us the number of witnesses we'll be able to invite and the deadline to which we have to submit the witnesses by for that study of 2 meetings?
The second motion. Yeah, so we'll work on that. Let us get the invites out to the ministers. I will update, if I get any updates by tomorrow, I will update the respective vice chairs and let everyone know. Okay, with that, I really want to thank all the members. This week has been tough. Long. So thank you. Yeah, yes. So, but thank you. But thank you for your cooperation and your patience and your hard work. So we have been able to get through the legislation. So I really appreciate making changes to your schedules and being here for many hours together. It has been good spending time together. So thank you.
First time I noted the
Is the meeting adjourned?
colleague Alexi went up.
Okay. Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.